develop new habits to work towards customer outcomes in a sustainable and enjoyable way. And that way, we make sure that transformations aren't scary beasts anymore that no one wants to be accountable for, but it's an effective way of running a company in today's volatile environment. So transformations aren't transformations anymore, it's just an adaptation to the ever-changing world.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Engati CX. I'm your host Vineet, and we're really glad to have all of you join us today. On this show, we talk to CX and technology experts from around the world. We explore, uncover, and share fresh insights on creating experiences that your customers will remember and look forward to. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code digital CX platform available across 14 different channels with 45,000 solutions created across 186 countries in every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc. magazine, Tech World, CIO, and many others. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 400,000 visitors annually. And now for our guest. Olga Potaptseva is the founding director and CX implementation advisor at the European Customer Consultancy. She has a strong background in customer insight and CX strategy implementation and has led many projects in UK, Middle East, and Russia, often pioneering CX adoption in new markets with cutting edge technology. She has also consulted and mentored leading organizations in a variety of industries, including but not limited to insurance, banking, and retail. Recently, she's been named as one of the top 25 most influential CX professionals in 2019 by CX Magazine. Welcome to the show, Olga. We are thrilled to have you.
Hi, really nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
You too. But before we dive into our interview, don't forget to subscribe to Engati and tap the bell icon to get access to exclusive content from thought leaders around the globe. So, getting back to our interview, Olga, is the creation of voice of the customer systems and CX measurement mechanisms mandatory for all businesses?
I would say so, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that. It's like when you drive your car and you have all the controls, you don't necessarily look at those controls until they tell you that something's wrong. You might check velocity every now and then to make sure you don't violate any rules. So same with the voice of the customer. If you don't have a measurement system in place, how do you know what your customer needs are and how successfully you're meeting them? So yes, I think having that system is mandatory.
Okay. And so, if a company wants to launch a voice of customer program, what would be the three initial measures that they would need to start with?
I think the measures that the company chooses need to honestly reflect the reality of that company, their market, and be actionable. They also need to fit with the nature of the business. So let's say we're talking about a monopoly, and it would be very unreasonable for them to choose NPS or likelihood to recommend as their measure. So they might go for satisfaction instead. Or if we're talking about a debt collection company, perhaps satisfaction isn't the right measure for them, and they might go for ease. So I believe all companies should have a measure that reflects how well they're meeting their customers' needs, though. An example of such measure could be Net CNS score that has been created by Jonathan Mendel and Stephen Hewitt, and it should probably be supplemented with a relevant measure that reflects their customer experience strategy. So in answer to your question, I don't think there is a set of matrix that is fit for all. It's very much a flexible system that has to be fit for business requirements.
And do you think that some companies will be able to adopt it much more effectively than other companies?
The effectiveness doesn't depend on the measure itself. It depends on the organizational adoption and accountability. Yes, some companies would be more willing to act upon the insights and some won't. But if the measure is relevant to their reality, there is a high chance that it will lead to a sustainable change in customer centricity.
Okay. And so, when do you feel that CSAT would be a much better metric over NPS?
I think NPS by nature is a measure that is based on the propensity to recommend. So if a business is not based on recommendations, then it's very difficult to measure recommendations because you don't know whether they're really driving your business success. So if you don't expect your customers to recommend you, then don't measure it. And perhaps satisfaction would be a better measure of it.
Okay. So, can you give me an example of maybe an industry which would be better off with CSAT?
Um, an industry that would be better off with CSAT, I think, well, for some reason, automotive came to mind immediately.
Yeah.
I think satisfaction in that industry is really important,
Correct.
although some would argue that you'd rather measure customer delight, which is really a subset of customer satisfaction question. Um, the satisfaction needs to correlate with propensity to buy as well. So if you can link satisfaction with revenue, that's the best approach. In automotive, that link is particularly clear. In telecoms, that works pretty well, provided there is enough competition and freedom to choose. But NPS in telecom works pretty well too. Um, Retail, to a certain extent, is driven by satisfaction, and some B2B industries as well. So, um, for example, FMCG in B2B in particular is very well suited for satisfaction.
Yeah, totally agree to your point on automotive, like linking revenue to customer satisfaction. That will be the ideal way to go about it. So, how many customer journey maps does a company need? And do we need a customer journey map for every customer category or persona?
I suggest being pragmatic in this regard and think of a journey map purpose. And that purpose is to lead to tangible improvements in customer experience. So that means taking action. And now think, how many journey maps can you act upon?
Yeah.
Good question to ask yourself is maybe, where can we make the biggest impact? Or what customer group is most important to our company? Or where will we be playing in 2 or 3 years' time? And then perhaps focus on those journeys as a priority. And the risk you want to avoid with journey mapping is doing it for the sake of mapping and creating a beautiful picture. But what you need is really an actionable mechanism that is going to be constantly evolving to drive that change. And another risk is going to the deepest level of detail so that you're not able to see the big picture anymore. And then you're chasing small improvements that don't really matter. They don't drive your outcome measures as much. So I think it's having the right balance between the quantity and the depth of customer journey maps. That's important.
And do you think that, like in a company, is it the only the job of the customer experience officer to know about this customer journey, or like even someone in finance should also be aware of this, so that to give a better like approach to it?
I think customer experience in general isn't a job of one particular individual. The role of a customer experience manager is to lead that initiative and to engage everyone else with the customer agenda. So they're like a repository of knowledge, and they have all the tools and the mechanisms to make it happen, but they can't make it happen alone.
Yeah.
So everyone who's delivering the customer journey needs to be aware of the journey and need to be aligned to the customer outcomes that they are jointly working towards.
Okay. So, how can businesses go about creating a roadmap for digital transformation, and how should they align and put together distinct innovations across various platforms and geographies?
Well, I have a very, very strong view that digital transformation must be aligned to delivering positive customer outcomes.
Yeah.
So a roadmap for digital transformation has to align to solving critical customer issues and delivering value to customers to make things easier for them. So it would then be logical to innovate not just within the digital space, but across various platforms, creating that omni-channel experience. And the channels have to work together within the customer-centric service design. I think that for the success of that roadmap and to make that its implementation a little bit less complex, it needs to include employee engagement, involvement, and employee adoption. Because just like any change, digital transformation is not very easy to embed, and there will be psychological barriers for the employees to be willing to do things differently.
Yeah.
So what I do is agile CX implementation methodologies, and that instills the right habits and the right practices to make change less scary, if not enjoyable. So I think breaking major transformational activities into smaller tasks that de-risks accountability in a way, and people are a lot more willing to engage with it.
Yeah, totally agree with your point. Like when something seems daunting at the beginning and you break it into small parts, well, definitely it means a lot more approachable.
Yes, definitely. I often tell about an imaginary example of flying to the moon. You know, if we decided to fly to the moon right now and we took a rocket and flew, that would probably end very badly. We'll fall.
Yeah.
Definitely not onto the moon. But when people first decided to launch themselves onto the moon, they first did exploration. So they tried to explore gravity first. They try to explore their space. What is it that we know about where we exist? And then they launched objects into space first to see how objects behave. Then they launched animals. Then they tried to put machines onto the moon to explore the surface. Is that a solid surface? Is this where we want to be?
Yeah.
And only then they decided to launch humans. So it is all about manageable transformation rather than this big scary thing that we potentially want to go to, but we're not even sure if we want to be there.
Yeah. And also, like when all these things were happening, they were working in union, like not in silos. So I think even companies like they should not work in silos. Do you agree to that? Like
Yes, absolutely. I think siloed working is a thing of the past, and unfortunately many companies
the
still
traditional
do
company.
that.
Yeah.
And there are very good reasons for functional expertise and having functions, but those functions shouldn't be isolated, and they all should be working to deliver customer outcomes or common goals.
Correct. So, how will the digital transformation of B2B enterprises be carried out, and what problems ought to be tackled, and the what will be the complexity of those difficulties and problems?
I think depending on the industry, B2B usually have a more complex ecosystem, and that may involve distributors, wholesalers, regulators, and multiple decision makers.
Yeah.
So digital transformation, again, needs to firstly specify what customer problem we're trying to solve. So I'll give you an example that might bring it to life is catering and restaurants, for example. So your primary buyer as a FMCG company, you would sell to chefs. And chefs want to have enough stock, but not too much. And they want to order quickly if they run out. But whilst they're waiting for their delivery, which hopefully isn't going to be too long, they want to be able to satisfy their guests. Right?
Correct.
So if we approach our digital transformation from that perspective, is how can we solve that problem, right? Maybe we need to make sure that we have pre-authorized purchase, repeat delivery at specific times. We need to have a standard basket. We know what they order on all the time, and just have that ready for them. Perhaps that would be a wholesaler location search or even emergency recipe with a few ideas to substitute their usual ingredients. So this way we will ensure we don't miss out on any sales opportunities too. So we still satisfy the demand, we solve the problem, and we sell what we want to sell. However, had we approached this transformation from a business perspective, we probably would have said, how can we sell more? How can we use digital channels to sell more of what we produce? Which would probably mean that we would miss out on some of the important opportunities, and we wouldn't have considered the complex environment of approvals and stock availability and satisfying guest needs that the chefs find themselves in.
Yeah.
So I think that way of looking at our channels from a customer perspective is really effective, not just for the customer, but for the business too.
Yeah, totally agree with your point because if we think like a business and only focus on the how much my top line and bottom line is going to make a difference, there will be a limitation. But if we put ourselves into the uh, shoes of our customer, we'll be able to and analyze the customer journey at every point. We'll be able to, I think, get better insights.
I agree. I agree. And it definitely needs to be driven by customer insights.
Yeah. Any other sound bites you would like to leave our audience with?
I think just as a summary, that customer-centric transformations need to be based on customer insights and employee adoption. And these are the two pillars that I always advocate, and this is how I build my consultancy. And with the Agile CX implementation toolkit, I give my clients the tools and, more importantly, develop new habits to work towards customer outcomes in a sustainable and enjoyable way. And that way, we make sure that transformations aren't scary beasts anymore that no one wants to be accountable for, but it's an effective way of running a company in today's volatile environment. So transformations aren't transformations anymore, it's just an adaptation to the ever-changing world.
Like or maybe in a world that's changing so often, that's the only permanent thing which you know is going to happen.
Absolutely, yeah. We always have to be transforming.
Yeah. And I
And I
really
think 2020 was the best example of that, wasn't it?
correct. I really like the point. So employees are also our customers. It's like you got to start from them.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Olga, for giving us your time. Like your insights were really valuable, and I know our audience is going to enjoy this interview.
Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing the full interview and engaging with the audience.
Yes. So, folks, we'll be back with a brand new episode with a new expert soon. And so stay tuned, and we'll see you around for the next one.